Okay. G'day, everyone. So today, really special episode. Got my first guest, and before we get into that, I just want to pose a question: whether or not you have found yourself sometimes walking around, whether it's in the city or parks and things like that, or even on a hiking trail, and thought to yourself that was really difficult to maneuver. Get around a particular area for whatever reason. Try applying that to stadiums or, in this instance, a motorsport location such as the Australian Grand Prix, and try adding that again to someone with limitations on their own physical abilities, whether that's a wheelchair or crutches or whatever form that might take. So today with me to talk about that is Rachel from the Accessible Racing Life. She's an advocate who works with motorsport teams, the Australian Grand Prix Foundation, and further parts of the community to improve the functionality of motorsport. So, Rach, welcome to the second seat. It's really great to
Hello.
have you here.
Thank you for
You're
having
actually
me.
my. That's okay. You're my first guest, so
Yay. Honored.
yeah,
Hashtag
it's a real
Australia.
privilege. I know, right? So we've sort of touched base a few times beforehand in setting this up,
Mhm.
but I'd really love to hear from you and for the wider audience what Accessible Racing Life is all about, and what your goals are in achieving that.
Sure. So, Accessible Racing Life essentially is a community for motorsport fans who have disabilities, who have diverse needs, who have all different sorts of needs to come together where we share information, where we educate people. It's just a big community where people can come together, share their own stories. You know, we have access tips for Formula One, for supercars, for IndyCars, for all kinds of events. It's really just a nice way to get people who might be disadvantaged, people who don't know what they're doing, people who don't understand or need some help, need some advice, to just be there to support them on their journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. Uh, I appreciate the pointing to the tips piece there, because I remember when I first came across your account online, seeing some of the engagement that you are having, particularly with the AusGP in that space,
Mhm.
highlighting the difficulties around even just finding information for those that needed access support. Um, to get to the ground and the circuit and move around and whatnot, let alone finding where they're going to be sitting.
Yeah. So there's a real lack of consistency. I say time and time again, disability is the most underrepresented minority when it comes to motorsport. We've touched on so many other variables. You've got, especially, in terms of Formula One, they've done, We Races One. They've looked at, you've got the Pride. You've got all those different sorts of communities, but disability is the one community that's really lacking. So it was just, it was a real way for me to be able to put my expertise, my lived experience, my knowledge into practice and help people. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've certainly appreciated it, uh, and it's helped expose my own, well, not biases, but more the. It's just something that doesn't come to the front of mind a lot, right? When you don't have those challenges to face on a day-to-day basis, and it's not front of mind, um, because I don't have anyone in my immediate family that requires those support mechanisms and things like that.
Yep.
And so that's one benefit I've really taken from our budding relationship and friendship is those lessons, and those things are, for me, certainly starting to become um, more aware. Uh, and it was something I did notice when I was at the AusGP this year, that certain areas, even for the new overpasses that had been installed, it was still quite difficult, even for someone that has no disability, to get up and across, like the level of the steepness of the stairs and things like that. I could imagine,
Yeah.
even if someone's ambulatory in that regard, let
Yeah.
alone wheelchair access and things like that. So, A, I appreciate that, but B, it must be positive in one way, having seen some of the progress that
Hmm.
you've helped achieve, but still frustrating not
Absolutely. Yeah.
seeing or seeing how far you've still got to go.
Correct. So we lobbied really hard. Access across the circuit was something that we really, really pushed for. I've had countless phone calls, emails, meetings, just to bring up these points. And while I really do appreciate that they had the lift there, that made a world of difference for us this year. Absolutely. But again, there's no consistency, there's no contingency plan. What happens if the lift fails? What happens if the lift breaks? There's just, you need to always have a plan B, C, D ready to go in circumstances like that. And that's, I think, where the frustration comes in. And I understand they're doing the best that they can do. And believe me, it is so, so appreciated. But yeah, it's just about listening to people with lived experience who have been to, infinite amount of race events between them and actually tangibly know what they're talking about. So
Mm. Yeah, the point about contingencies rings like alarm bells in my mind, and that's probably the military officer coming out of me because, there's a saying that we have, or had, because I'm out now, but it was a saying when I was in the army that it was, if you have two of something, you only have one, and if you have one of something, you have none, right? So,
yeah.
um, completely agree with that observation you've made there, and it strikes me, even from a risk management perspective,
Yep.
that
Exactly.
something like that hadn't been considered because there are people that are employed for that very purpose. Whether they're
Exactly.
engineers or occupational health and safety staff, etc. So, yeah, I can definitely appreciate the frustrations in that space, which I suppose
Yep.
leads really well into um, what we can do about increasing awareness. You've
Hmm.
spoken about your engagement with places like the Australian Grand Prix Foundation and what have you, but even on an individual level, how can we better improve our own awareness on these issues?
Yeah. So it's really just about listening. It's about taking in information, not just thinking or assuming that you know what's best or that you know what's going to happen. I was just going to touch on an example for you. This was your first year at the Grand Prix, wasn't it?
Mm.
How
Yes, it
did you
was. Yeah.
go? How did you go with the exit? How did you find that mass exodus at the end of the Grand Prix?
Oh, it
Like
was
it's like a herd,
horrid.
isn't it?
Horrid,
Yep.
right? Like, and from my military time, I've got injuries in my lower back and hips and knees and things like that. So, I was getting uncomfortable standing there for over an hour. I could
Yep.
imagine, people that have got more severe impacts and
Yep.
disabilities having to do the same thing. It'd be absolute chaos to try and get out and maneuver because you've got
Yep.
everyone that's fully able-bodied moving around you and probably ignoring your own stresses, let alone someone like yourself with your crutches and walking sticks and things like that needing to
Yep.
stand for such a long period of time. It gets
Absolutely.
really difficult.
Yeah. And that's where the awareness comes in. Like leaving for me is the most difficult part of the weekend. Even if I leave 15 minutes before the end of the Grand Prix, it is still so difficult. You have people jostling you, you have people pushing you, you have elbows and knees, and,
Mm.
like you're standing in a line where you've got people pushing in front of you. It's about respect. It's just about basic human decency. It's about, like somebody with a walking stick, you see that and you recognize that and you give them space. You say, would you like to go in front of me, or can I help you with something, can I help you with your bag? Like it's just, it comes down to common courtesy at the end of the day. But that's where the push for education for people really comes into it. We really need to be focusing on just small little tweaks, like leaving gate one, you have got two options. You're either on the left side or the right side. Where do people with accessible needs come into that. And to take that one step further, what happens if there's an emergency? Say there's a fire and all of those people are trying to leave at one point, like it's just about taking notice of your surroundings, taking that into consideration and really just trying to accommodate people where you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm 100% on board. I think that's some really good points there, particularly the just calling out that awareness. And I think it's not just the listening side, but looking around and being
Mhm.
spatially aware to what's going on.
Absolutely.
And your point about the emergency piece rings really true because as I was leaving post the Grand Prix on the Sunday afternoon, we actually had a medical situation occur, probably 5 meters in front of where I was standing initially. And the amount of time that it took for first aid people to get in there, and that was just a qualified person standing nearby, that is, let alone the actual local medical staff from a circuit perspective, able to get in and support and move the person in and out of there. Like that took minutes, and I couldn't see what was happening, but it still boggled my mind. And you're right, if there was a fire, or if heaven forbid there was something worse going on, given the global state of the world, then it would be absolutely manic. And I actually wrote to the AusGP Foundation in my feedback survey and said, you need to fix the flow issue between gate 1 and gate 10 because there's just too many people.
Yep.
And, when you've got people flooding the track on completion of the race itself to get down and have a look at watch the podium events and all the rest of it, which is an incredible experience. And I was lucky enough to not have to worry about that because I was in the Piastri stand and could see directly onto the podium. But, you've got thousands of people trying to exit, and then you've got all the operational staff from not just the Grand Prix Foundation itself, but Formula One and all their supporting efforts to get in there and start packing up and getting ready to move, in this instance, to China. Yeah, it's there's a lot. I'm like, the more I think about this, the more my mind is blowing, and the threads that I'm starting to pull, just the way my mind works, on some of the issues that can go wrong and how we could potentially do better. So,
but it's like you said before, when you're not used to it, when you don't live it every single day, you're not conscious of it. Like you wake up every day, you can get out of bed, you can walk to the bathroom to get your breakfast. Sometimes you take simple things like that for granted. I wish I had the ability to be able to get out onto the main street and, watch the podium. But for me, that would be an absolute nightmare. I would probably be knocked off my feet. And then trying to exit, it's, even when you leave early, it's difficult, but, trying to navigate something like that. And that's where, these little accommodations, we're not asking for special circumstances. We're not asking for the world, we're just asking for equality, really.
Yeah. Now I've got an example or an analogy in my mind to try and help people picture things. When we talk about, or when you talk about the accessibility support. So I noticed one of the options, or one of the things that they did for the Grand Prix this year, as you mentioned, was the lift, particularly around the Melbourne Junction area, and the keeping that clear, which was fantastic.
Yes.
I suppose the analogy that's coming to mind for certain things is basically having almost like a bike lane, not necessarily segregated, but just highlighted. Others can use it, but it's one of those things where if there is a person with accessibility needs in that space, you effectively give way to them.
Exactly.
That is their primary form of lane for transport, so to speak. Yeah.
Let me
Does
give
that
you
make sense,
another
or is there a
yeah,
better
yeah,
way to
absolutely. Let me give you
explain
another
that?
example.
Yep.
So before the lift was in place, and I'm talking years and years ago, I'm talking like, 2018-ish, when you had to basically, you had no choice, right? You had to go across that bridge to get to the other side.
Yep.
Now, if you were going to Melbourne Walk, and I am very, very slow, right? With a walking stick, I have one speed and it's slow. So you go up the stairs, across the top. It's okay when you go across the top because people can go around you. But you think about the people, we're talking about hundreds of people who are lined up behind you. They want to get to
Mm,
Melbourne Walk to get the best spot possible. They're frustrated. They're getting angry. They're yelling and screaming at you. You get
yeah.
flustered. You get upset. You're in tears. You get down to the other side, and it's literally like a stampede. So, what you're saying is absolutely on point. And you'll find when you come out of the lift, they actually had that scenario this year. They had that lane on the left hand side purely for people with those needs. But it just needs to be implemented in other places. We were going into the paddock at one stage and it was the same thing. There was a space for people who had wheelchairs or who had crutches or whatever needs they had. There's just got to be those small little touches that make
Yeah.
a world of difference.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like it is only small, and it's not, you know, from what I've seen in the past at other events, the wheelchair accessible entry isn't closed to people that don't have wheelchairs. It's just that
Mhm.
if someone with those access needs arrives, guess what? They have priority of entry in that space.
Yep.
And your point about common human decency at the very start of our conversation, I think just rings true. It's not hard to be a nice person, and just step back and just go, oh, that's their context. Like, what would that be like to live in
Yep.
that person's shoes every
Yep.
day?
Yep.
Like talk to my
We don't.
boys in that space, what would it be
Yep.
like if you fell off your bike and lost your leg, like, because you're doing something
Yep.
stupid?
Yep.
You'd have to live with that, and just having that context is something I really like to talk about. And I won't dive into
Yep.
that here, but that's what it comes
Yep.
down to, is just appreciating other people's
Absolutely.
contexts.
Yep. And we don't know what anybody else, we don't know what their circumstances are. We don't know what
Mm,
they're living with day to day. People with hidden disabilities, we don't know who has anxiety. We don't know who is deaf. We don't know who has learning disabilities. We don't know any of that. So that's
mm,
why. And I understand we're talking about motorsport, we're talking about fast paced, high octane, all of those sorts of things. But there's still a time and a place to just slow it down, to take a minute, to just, appreciate the fact that you are living in a body that is able to do this, whereas the person next to you might not be able to. And it might be the last time that they're ever able to do that. It might be the first time that they're ever able to do that. And we don't
mm.
we don't think about those things sometimes. So that's for me a huge part of my advocacy, is that, you know, people are scared to take these steps because of circumstances like this. So trying to,
Yeah.
coax them into doing it is a huge part of what I do.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really lovely to hear and see, because I have seen it as well. You recently shared a profile of a young man that's getting into motorsport himself, despite the challenges of his disabilities. And I sat back and I'm like, that is awesome. Like,
Yep.
it's hard enough as it is to get into motorsport as a fully able person, let alone adding the difficulties around that space. And there's another young man that I came across. I think he's Spanish. I can't remember his name right now, but he's a young boy. Lost one of his legs. So he
Pedro.
literally drive. Pedro, that's
Yep.
it. Yeah.
Yep.
I couldn't remember his surname either, but his face springs to mind, and he's just so happy doing
Yeah.
what he loves to do,
Yep.
and he's actually competing at the
Yeah.
top level for his age
He
group. He's
is. Yep.
absolutely killing it, and it just goes to show that it doesn't matter what your physical attributes are. If you've got the ability to drive, then they should
Absolutely.
be afforded that opportunity. So yeah, I think the work that you do is truly um, incredible. I certainly appreciate it just from the lessons that I've learned, but just watching how it benefits the community and seeing the things that you achieved with OzGP this year and hopefully for next year
Yeah.
can continue to improve. And I suppose that leads me to the next part of what we've been talking about, which is, you know, besides listening and increasing your own awareness, I think the one thing that I've taken away from our interactions is that if you're doing that, you can then start to speak to advocates such as yourself, but then highlight observations that you make when you attend
Yep.
events, whether it's the OzGP, whether it's other motorsport events like the Supercar Championship, which I know we've both spoken about attending
Yep.
respectively later this year, whether it's,
Watch this space.
tennis or footy or, yeah, that's right, so um, for everyone that's listening, I think the one thing that you can take away from this, apart from your own improved knowledge, is that when you go to these events and you get those feedback surveys, make sure you think about not just your own experience, but your observations of what the experience might have been for everyone else around you.
Absolutely. Because we can't do it without that feedback. If we don't know what's broken, then we can't fix it. And like you say, even from an able-bodied point of view, like you observe and you witness and you see these people and you recognize these things. So please, by all means, if you see something, shout out, let us know, tell the Grand Prix, tell whoever, find a volunteer, let them know, because that all goes towards helping.
Yeah, definitely. I think the final question I've got, and then we can probably just talk about our experiences at the OzGP if you really want to get into that space,
Absolutely.
Is the real life challenges. I touched on my own seat being in the Piastri stand for the OzGP, but I know there was a situation that you mentioned at Silverstone last year with the Lando stand and how
Yep.
some of the challenges that were in that space. Do you mind elaborating? We don't have to go into full details, but it's just the key element.
Of course. So there were a number of people who had disabilities last year who, massive Lando fans who had purchased tickets and all they wanted to do was, meet Lando. They wanted to, give Lando bracelets, or they wanted to, take photos with Lando. And it got to a point where they couldn't do that because there was no disability access. And again, this is where consistency comes into it and information. And this is why I'm so loud, like you said earlier. I really am. If there's a problem, I'm not scared to address it because we need information. You don't understand. People with disabilities, they need to plan 12 months in advance. I'm already planning now for next year, But Lando stand is huge and it has blown up and it has become almost otherworldly, hasn't it? To know that there is no accessible access to the Lando stand, it's a bit disappointing. And it's not just the Lando stand. We've got the Carlos stand, we've got the Piastri stand, we've got so many driver stands. You've got the Williams stand in Miami, you've got McLaren stands at the Grand Prix in Australia, around the world, wherever you go, there are fan stands everywhere. Now, I recognize that that is a premium service, but should we make that available to fans with disabilities too? Why should they miss out, just because somebody can't put a ramp here or there can't be, an easily accessible entrance or exit? So it really begs the question, what do we do about those sorts of scenarios?
Yeah, I personally, like, not knowing much about how to erect a grandstand, particularly when we look at Albert Park, which is a semi-permanent facility. But I certainly noticed that when I was at the Piastri stand this year, was all the entrances were across sort of muddy, barky type areas and then into stairs. Which blew my mind. I actually thought to myself a couple of times, I'm like, oh, that's really odd that it's all stairs. Because it would be difficult to move around, and the space for the stairs as well. Up and down each side of the grandstand was quite tight. So even if you had someone, with ambulatory access that could move up and down stairs, linking back to your point earlier, or your analogy earlier, where you're going up and down the bridges over the overpasses, where you've got someone that might be a bit more slow moving and taking time to get up and down, it's going to cause those backlogs and frustrations and potentially increase risk of somebody else falling. Now,
Yep.
that doesn't even need to be a person with access issues. It could be a
No.
child that's taking a while to get up and down those things. So,
Yep.
there's a lot to consider there, but I think that's the job of the people that are designing these, designing the circuit grandstands and having them erected and
Absolutely.
putting them into place. So, certainly for me, it was something I highlighted back to the AusGP, that getting up and down was challenging, or would have been challenging rather, for people with access issues. And even it
Yep.
doesn't even need to be the entire grandstand in my mind. It
Yep.
could just be a couple of key sections. If it's 8 sections, maybe it's every second one,
Yep.
and that increases choice, and accessibility and availability, for
Absolutely.
those people that need it.
And I think we should also mention there are specific spaces for accessible grandstands. You've got the Jones grandstand, Schumacher, you've got Turn 12, Wattability, but they are limited. They're really, really limited, especially when you are purchasing tickets online. That whole process in itself is a whole other story. We need a whole other podcast just for that alone. But I think that the thing that really needs to stand out is the fact that we just need to make spaces available, like you said, whether it's every second, every fourth for every eighth or whatever it is like that. But if I think back to so last year's Grand Prix, it poured. It was so wet. And when you're coming down those stairs, and like you say, it's bark and it's dirt and it is mud, and it was so slippery. But and this is why I always say we need to listen to people with lived experience. Accessibility should not be an add-on. It shouldn't be, we found a problem, we need to fix it. It should be, let's listen to people who know what they're talking about. I could have identified that in 30 seconds flat. I could have said to you, here's this, instead of it being a commercial ploy, where one person monopolizes the accessibility services. Why can't we just share it around? Why can't we have a whole lot of people with lived experience and professional experience? And it's what I do for my day job. It's what I know. It's almost like I eat, breathe, sleep disability, So that's for me where the unfairness comes in.
Yeah, you're 100% on the money. And when I think about the project planning that would go into this, I would expect subject matter experts in the room for those key project planning. It should be a case of
And sorry,
learning. No, you're right.
just to butt in there, there are subject matter experts. But the thing is, and especially like I can only talk for the Australian Grand Prix and a few others that I've been involved with, but sometimes those subject matter experts, the experiences that they have are not the experiences that people on the ground are having. In terms of the Australian Grand Prix, the people that they have doing their accessibility, they're employed by essentially, an Australian superstar who is a disabled person. And it always blows my mind that you can have somebody advocating for disability who is standing up in a corporate box sipping champagne saying, I'm so glad that my whole community has come here to embrace oh, mate, like do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why we need the little people. That's why we need those bridges and those connections, because it's a whole world apart.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it begs the question, what is actually defining a subject matter expert in this instance, right? Like, just because someone's a disability advocate doesn't necessarily mean that, that they hold the level of experience.
Mhm. Yeah,
Expertise doesn't necessarily mean experience, I suppose, in this instance.
exactly.
Yeah. That, so that's A, it's saddening, and B, frustrating to hear that that's the way it's has been happening. But, you know,
Yeah.
I think we link back to the points we've made before about the feedback. It's
Mhm.
certainly it's super important that,
Yeah.
you know, people are sharing their lived experience with the Australian Grand Prix Association or whatever event it is, but they're considering the context of not just themselves, but how they observed it for other people. And in this instance, we're talking about people with disabilities or access needs. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Um,
Absolutely.
but so firstly, I want to say thank you. Like, this has been an awesome, awesome chat, and I'm sure we could probably
Pleasure.
talk for
Yeah.
ages about it. I'm being emboldened and impassioned about disability advocacy, just from our chats today and our
Yep.
previous interactions as well. So I'm super appreciative. I hope everyone listening um, gets to learn something and takes it away. And even if it's just realizing that, oh crap, like maybe I have been taking little things for granted on a day-to-day
Yep.
basis, and I need to be more aware about how these things could impact someone else on a completely different level. That's
Yep.
that's enough, and it only needs to be one person, right? Like,
Yeah.
if we've improved,
Absolutely.
got one person there, they can go and do it, share it with other people, and it just continues to grow. But that's what I would implore the
Yeah.
listeners to take away from this, is that awareness of themselves and
Just
others, and share it.
just do your best. Rome was not built in a day. We have got a
Mm.
long way to go. But in terms of disability, visibility, just do your best. That's all you can do, and that's all we ask.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But before we wrap up, what do you think of the progress of the season so far, and where do you think things are going to be for Oscar and some of the other Carlos? I can see in the background as well as I know
Awesome.
quite fondly that he's your favorite driver
He's my fave. Yeah.
for the
Oh,
rest
look,
of the year.
I'm a little bit disappointed with Williams, considering they came out, midway last year and said, we're on top of everything. Our car's going to be amazing. Everybody had them pegged as the dark horse. So that's a little bit disheartening. Look, Carlos is an amazing, amazing analyst. What's the word? I can't
Yep,
think.
analyst. Yep.
Analyst. He just Max has a special way of driving, but Carlos has a special way of interpreting. And I think his brain is just, like, he jokes about when he gets into those moments where he sort of like disassociates, but he's probably got 1,001 things going through his brain about what was the car doing? How can I fix that? What do I need to tell somebody?
Mm.
So, I'm confident he's got a win coming at some point, but I do look, I rate Oscar. I think he could surprise us. Don't underestimate it, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think you might appreciate. I'm wearing my. I've got the Williams Australian shirt on today.
The
Managed to
signs
pick up.
shirt.
Yeah, from the fan activation at Federation, was it Federation Square? Or
It
quite near there at
was
least.
the
Yeah.
atrium.
Yes, that's right, the atrium. That's what I was looking for. So yeah,
Yep.
I'm in agreement with Williams. It is disappointing. I think a lot of people are disappointed. Not least the team themselves, particularly with the work that they have been putting in. I agree. I think there is potentially a win in the cards. I don't know if it'll be this year. This next few weeks off prior to Miami will be really interesting to see how teams develop, particularly for Williams in this
Mm,
instance, whether or not they can lose the weight that the extra weight that they're carrying. But it's somewhere
mm.
between 14 and 24 kilos. It keeps getting bandied about, which is a
Yeah,
lot.
it is.
So, but yeah, as you know, I'm a massive Oscar fan, so
Yep.
my heart is definitely with him. And
Yep.
for me, Japan showed exactly what he's capable of
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
lesser car as well. And if it wasn't, you know, wasn't for the safety car, I think he definitely had a very, very strong shot at keeping Kimi and George at bay.
I agree. I think he had it wrapped up, and everyone says Kimi was too fast. Kimi was always going to win, but Oscar is very, very strategically good.
Yeah.
He would have known what to do. He would have pulled it out of the bag, I think. So I think I said that he would come close to winning, and I think he's probably going to have a good run this year, and I hope he does because he was so disappointed for him not to win last year.
Yeah,
so we won't get into that because I have opinions.
Yeah, I think a lot of
So,
us do. I think a lot of us
Yeah.
do. So, but thank you again so much for coming. I
Pleasure.
really, really appreciate it. It's a privilege and an honor to have you as my first guest on the show. So, I
Thank you.
look forward to having you back at some point. We can
I will
talk
be
about
back.
some other issues and all the rest of it and go from there. So,
Absolutely.
cheers. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Josh.